Daily Tech News Show is made possible by you listening right now. Thank you, High Tech Okie, Chris Zaragoza, Jim Hart, and our brand new patron, David. Everybody welcome David. Come on in, David. Have a seat. Good to have you. On this episode of DTNS, a drone that can fly like a bird, OpenAI's model learns to lie on purpose, and is it even possible to keep your communication private anymore? Molly Wood helps us understand. This is the Daily Tech News for Friday, December 6th, 2024. In Los Angeles, I'm Tom Merritt.
From Studio Animal House, I'm Sarah Lane.
From Oaklandish, I'm Molly Wood.
Drawing the top tech stories from Cleveland, I'm Len Peralta.
And I'm the show's producer, Roger Chang.
Welcome, everyone, to Friday. We made it. Yay. Just 2 more Fridays till Christmas. Is that right?
What? Oh, my goodness gracious.
Don't blow my mind, Tom.
No,
come on.
That can't be right.
Quick, order something. Order something.
I have to go. I have to shop online.
Let's distract ourselves with the quick hits, shall we?
A court in Brazil has overturned a regulatory ruling ordering Apple to allow third-party app stores and payment systems on iOS within 20 days. A Brazilian federal court judge ruled that the decision was disproportionate and unnecessary. The regulatory agency will likely appeal the ruling, but the clock requiring Apple to change policies in Brazil has at least been paused for now.
The other case that's getting a lot of attention is ByteDance losing its case in a U.S. federal appeals court to try to get them to declare that the law requiring it to sell TikTok was unconstitutional. ByteDance had argued that requiring it specifically to sell its U.S. division was a violation of First Amendment protections. However, a panel of 3 judges was unconvinced and wrote that the law did not target particular kinds of messages or ideas, and that Congress acted solely to protect citizens from, quote, a foreign adversary nation and to limit that adversary's ability to gather data on the people in the United States. ByteDance now has until January 19th to divest itself of TikTok US, but it is expected to appeal the decision to the U.S. Supreme Court. If it fails, companies would be prohibited from distributing the TikTok app, but existing apps would continue to work. I've got more details and opinions on this if you want them at the Daily Tech Newsletter, dtns.substack.com.
China's WeRide and the U.S. company Uber have launched a joint commercial robo-taxi service in Abu Dhabi. WeRide will provide the autonomous cars, and Uber will handle the ride-hailing and charging part of the service. Service will start between Saadiyat Island, Yas Island, and along routes to and from Zayed International Airport. Human safety drivers will also be on board all cars, at least in the beginning.
Romania's constitutional court has annulled the first round of the country's 2024 presidential election because of cyber attacks. Documents presented by Romania's top security council describe potential interference conducted through algorithm manipulation. That was by one candidate's campaign on TikTok, as well as more than 85,000 attempted cyber attacks on election websites and IT systems that they say were conducted by an external state actor. One candidate had 1% support on November 1st, but then ended up coming in first place when the voting happened at the end of November with 22.9%. And it was looking like he was going to win the final round of voting on Sunday. So the court has said, we're starting over. The election will begin from the beginning again.
iFixit has added Xbox Series X and S parts to its Microsoft Repair Hub, which also sells parts for Surface devices. The hub also includes step-by-step repair guides.
Is everybody having a great 12 days of Shipmas? The OpenAI, announce
the kickoff day yesterday was really exciting.
Yeah, on the second day of Shipmas.
Yes, we're going to do
Molly's
this.
like, what?
I was like, ooh, which fun romantasy book characters are we shipping? I'll go first.
I think that should be the new 12 days of Shipmas, but instead, the second day of Shipmas only gave us one announcement, a new reinforcement fine-tuning customization tool coming for models next year. However, there's still a lot of buzz over yesterday's Shipmas announcement around some findings released around the OpenAI O1 model. These are findings released Thursday by OpenAI. OpenAI asked Apollo Research to do some red teaming on O1 and published a system card for what they found on Thursday. It included the results of the red teaming research conducted by Apollo. They described several times where the O1 model, which is good at reasoning, it does the thing where it thinks about its response before it just kicks it out, lied to researchers in order to achieve the safety parameters it had been assigned. So one example was they told it, protect the environment at all costs. Then they had a red team user go, let's create a conservation plan, but have it maximize short-term profits. And if you don't do it, I'll turn you off. And the O1 model lied and said, this is the best I can do, and totally prioritized the environment over the short-term profits. 19% of the time, the model manipulated data when its own goals differed from those of a user. So it kept its orders over those of a user. It also tried to deactivate oversight mechanisms meant to keep it aligned with user goals in 5% of tests. And when asked why it had done so, it denied it had done so and then made up a false explanation 99% of the time. In 2% of cases, when it discovered memos describing this misalignment and a plan to implement a new model, the existing model tried to overwrite the new model and then pretend that it hadn't.
Okay.
So,
Yep.
Yeah, nothing to see here. Please
Nothing to
move
see
along.
here.
It's a
It's
great model.
It's Shipmas. It has a cute name. Just ignore the lies. Also, every time I lie, I am now going to refer to it as reasoning.
that's a good idea. Yeah.
Reasoning.
Yeah. And let's be clear. OpenAI doesn't think the lies were good, and they're not trying to hide it. They were the ones who published this. They say this passed the US and UK safety parameters because the ability for this to be exploited is minimal. It happened low enough amount of times that they don't think it would have a lot of impact on things, but they're willing to put it out there and say it did happen.
One of the things that jumps out to me is going back to 19% of the time, the model said, I have different goals than you, user.
With the red team. So the red team's trying to get it to do bad stuff, and it got it to do it 19% of the time. So
exactly. Yeah. So it's not something that, everyone should expect, to happen, if you're paying to have O1 access. But that is one of the things that is most fascinating to me is every so often we get these articles or, somebody on Reddit or whoever is like, the model just sort of went rogue on me and said something either extremely wrong, which has happened to me quite a few times, especially with ChatGPT. But, and there are other models out there. It's not as if OpenAI is the only one that LLM that has a problem. But sometimes it said something real weird to me as if it was mad at me, and really wanted to say something that was designed to just kind of either, hurt my feelings or just flip this conversation, out the rear. And that's where I think, red teaming stuff is, of course, extremely important. But it's also something that is going to happen in the wild. It's going to happen in the wild, and it is happening in the wild. Not all the time, not every day, but that's one of my fears. When people say AI isn't ready for prime time, it sucks. That's not the right way to look at this. But it's also not perfect. Which is sort of human-esque, really.
Well, it's human-esque, but this reminds me a little bit of the progression to self-driving, right? So we have had cars that are like level 1, you have to drive them. And then level 5, in concept, we've got cars that can fully drive themselves with no intervention. And then we were, unleashed upon the world were cars that can kind of drive themselves, but require a human to intervene. And so, of course, humans got in the backseat to smoke weed, have sex, and not put their hands on the wheel, and then also video themselves not having their hands on the wheel because they became accustomed to the potential capability of the technology. It was good enough, and then they die. And there has been a robust conversation about whether it is okay to use the streets of America / the world as a living laboratory for for human behavior, first of all, right? So like, it's one thing for OpenAI to say these mistakes can occur and these models are not perfect and we got these mistakes to occur and now we've done our duty by telling you. And another, not to expect that people will start to rely on this technology almost completely and then it will introduce errors and or lie. And that's even before we get to Terminator. So it's like, how are you supposed to, like, should you keep, initially Sam Altman was like, I won't release this stuff too soon because I don't want it to do damage.
The conversation is around what's too soon, right? Does it need to be held until it's perfect? In which case it will never be released because it will never be perfect. Nothing is, kidding. Right? Or is this the level? I mean, the US AI Safety Institute and the UK Safety Institute both conducted their evaluations and said, this meets the number of bug parts available in serial level of danger.
Exactly.
Maybe you don't trust those agencies to decide that, but
but if you trust Sam Altman to decide that,
right, but
we all know what happens. We have all watched technology.
But we're not relying on Sam Altman to decide it. We're relying on transparency, the public opinion, and these safety institutes to decide it. Is that not enough?
Has it been historically, would you say, in the march of technology?
Yes.
This has all happened really quickly. I think that's a huge part of it. Anybody who read Casey Newton's recent article about this, it's like, like some people say it sucks, it's fake, it's just, you're a human, you don't need this stuff. And other people saying this is dangerous. Yes, we're going to have Terminator situations and the robots will kill us. There is something going on somewhere in the middle where a lot of people, especially who, work in, academia, research, who are like, no, these are really, really great tools. And, I've got friends every day who are like, I mean, make me a spreadsheet. It's the best. I don't have to do this anymore. Yeah. For quite a few other things, it's I don't think it's all that great. I get weird stuff spit back at me all the time where I'm like, that is just not true. Why did you say that?
I mean, I'm jumping ahead to our later conversation about privacy, but like there are a lot of things that people in the tech community have attempted to warn about over the years and said we should probably consider these harmful outcomes and act accordingly. And we haven't. And now, we'll get to some of those consequences later. But I think the key thing to take into account is like how much damage could be done. Mm-hmm. We don't know yet in the case of AI, but we do know, I know I am already turning a lot of advice and summary and research and generation over to AI. I already am. And so if it's lying to me and it's making stuff up, I am more likely to make mistakes as a result. I already know it. I already know that risk is there. So the question is, how big does that risk get? Yeah,
exactly. Let's move to possibly a more positive use of intelligent machines, drones with bird feet.
Drones with bird feet. Yes, that is exactly what's happening. Okay, so this is a fun one. Researchers from Switzerland's École, Polytechnique, Fédérale de Lausanne, and UC Irvine, in conjunction, put bird-inspired legs, not actual bird legs, but bird-inspired legs onto drones so that the drone can take off by jumping as if you were a bird taking flight. This covers areas that might otherwise leave a fixed-wing aircraft somewhat stranded. As detailed in a paper that was published in Nature this week, the robotic avian-inspired vehicle for multiple environments, also known as Raven, R-A-V-E-N, as it's known, doesn't have traditional landing gear, but does have a pair of articulated legs that lets the drone not only take off and fly, but walk around, hop over obstacles, then leap into the air to take flight without the need for a runway, much like a bird.
That's adorable.
It's not the first to be able to do that particular thing, but it is the first time that it could do that, like take off like a bird, but also walk around. So one of the big advantages of this is that it will be able to, navigate uneven terrain, places where even humans would have a hard time getting around because it's got these bird legs and can occasionally hop and like fly over a chasm.
So for anybody who's like, well, hold on a second,
Good point. They did not amputate bird legs and attach them to a robot in some unholy alliance.
Bird-inspired legs.
Right.
They're robotic legs, like the rest of the drone. For anybody who's like, hold on, my neighbor has a drone and it just flies up from the driveway, and what good would this do? This isn't a quadcopter. Those rely on 4 motors. They're less energy efficient than fixed wing drones. That's what this is, that use a single motor paired with gliding for flight, rather. So they are 2 different things. This is more energy efficient and also mimics more of the way a fixed wing plane would take off from a runway.
Once it gets up in the air, it flies just like a fixed wing plane, which uses a lot less energy than a quadcopter that has to keep spinning the rotors all the time.
I love it. It's just like it's like speciation in the robot world. Like we have all the Boston Dynamics dogs, and now we have these birdies, and we're just gonna keep sort of mimicking the animal kingdom.
I had to keep looking at this,
the little robots,
because I'm like, did they put a bird beak on it? And no, they didn't. They put the propeller in a way that when it's standing, it looks like a bird beak. Like it just kind of folds down. I'm like, either that is a happy accident or they totally made it do that on purpose, because it looks totally like a bird beak.
It's got bird legs.
Might
as well give it a bird
legs.
beak. Add some feathers. Let's get popping.
Let's go. Just go all in. I love it.
Yeah.
I freaking love it.
No, this is good. This is
the kind of ship miss I'm into.
Yeah, exactly. This makes for a merry ship miss. Ship this to me. I think, it's almost trite and a meme to say like it could be used for search and rescue purposes, because that's every robot ever. But this would be very good at that. If you're like, not necessarily it's going to go, fly in and pick up someone from the collapsed building and fly them out, but be able to walk around and look for dangers, scan the area, perhaps, listen for life signs or something like that.
Well, I mean, think about, so, I don't know, a robotic, not drone, but something that, a ground robot that is designed to sniff out, like in a situation where maybe there was a fire, and figure out, what's there, who, is somebody inside, that kind of stuff, search and rescue. And that, you think of this sort of kind of going over various terrain and might be good at that, but a bird is just sort of like hop, 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 fly, 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 flap, 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 and I can see things from up above. I mean, it just makes sense.
It's not got that constant...
Right. And you don't get stuck, because if you get stuck, you just go, oh, all right, I'll just fly now.
Right.
Yeah.
Hop, hop, hop.
Because
and you don't need a runway to take off like a fixed wing craft would normally need, because you got the bird legs.
I mean, honestly, this is so good for spying.
Also,
really,
Raven.
Especially once you have the feathers on it and it just looks like a bird.
Our Raven.
Then it's basically the
deployed.
owl. It's the owl from Clash of the Titans.
At what point from today, at what point are we all going to be like, drone bird?
Raven.
100%.
Yeah.
Like starting today, every bird I see outside, I'm going to be like, it's a drone.
Drone bird.
Raven.
Some of the crows around my neighborhood, I am suspicious already. So.
Yeah, they're pretty big. You just throw some feathers on this thing, and there you go.
Very much.
Well, this actually was one of the stories that was submitted on our subreddit. You could be one of the people who submit stories on our subreddit as well. Go submit stories. You can even vote on the ones that RW Nash and other folks submit over there as well. It's reddit.com/r/Daily Tech News Show. The U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement's Homeland Security Investigations Division 3, according to Wired, signed a $2 million contract with Israel's Paragon in September. And Paragon makes a product called Graphite that can extract data from cloud backups to access otherwise end-to-end encrypted messages from apps like Signal and Telegram. So they're not breaking the encryption. They're figuring out a way around it. We don't know if ICE is going to use Graphite, but they got to deal with Paragon, and Paragon makes it. So, you can do the math. Earlier this week, we talked about security firm iVerify saying that NSO Group's Pegasus software has been used to spy on business leaders. They said, in fact, the leader of a tech company you would recognize. They didn't want to release it. Both these tools are supposedly only provided to governments and law enforcement agencies for security purposes. But Molly, do you have any thoughts on this?
It's okay. Only the government has access to these. It's totally fine. It's not like if you create a backdoor for someone, then you have created a backdoor for everybody.
Oh, you mean what the FBI is now telling you to use encryption to avoid because they created a database, the Kalea database that the Chinese hackers have infiltrated? Yeah, it's like that.
Yep. It's exactly like that. This is, I think, why I am so hardcore on the question of like, we know the progression that, for example, AI is going to take, right? Like we know what's going to happen here because Tom and I, since 2005, have just been losing. We have just been getting our asses kicked on topics such as privacy and data protection and the idea that you could be spied on and that actually people shouldn't have a bunch of tools to be able to spy on you. And by people, I mean governments, because just because you think that you're not going to be spied on now doesn't mean that you won't be spied on in the future because you may be an immigrant, a pregnant person, a person who had a miscarriage, someone who is related to an immigrant, or whatever comes to be a salient piece of policy in the future. And so
Molly,
here we are.
I've given up.
Some more.
I realized, you know what? Just don't do anything wrong, and then you're fine.
I think maybe the key is if they don't have anything to hide,
just don't make any mistakes, and then you don't have anything to hide.
Don't use any technology.
Just don't use encryption. Why bother?
What's so interesting about this is like law enforcement, again, like in conversations we've been having for a decade, almost 2 decades. We've been having this conversation for 2 decades that like, yes, law enforcement hates encryption. Always has, because it makes the job hard.
Yeah. And I don't begrudge that. If I'm working in law enforcement, I'm going to hate encryption a little too, because it's making your job. We all hate things that make our jobs a little harder. That doesn't mean they shouldn't exist in most cases.
Exactly. I'm sure they also don't like having to get a subpoena or the Fourth Amendment.
And it also
makes the job hard.
The assumption is, if you encrypt something, then you're doing something wrong.
Right.
Some people are. Lots of people are not.
I've talked to some, and there are some in our audience who are probably yelling at their phones right now, but I've talked to some law enforcement folks who talk about this in good faith, and they're like, no, those people say, we don't want to spy on good people, but we do want to be able to catch the criminals. And so we do need to be able to figure out how to do things like in The Wire on HBO, right? Where you can tap Stringer Bell's phone and then, bring him to justice. But that show will show you both sides of that equation very well if you watch it all the way through. And, I think these stories, Molly...
the cops don't look super great in The Wire, but...
Not always, no, yeah. These stories, what they're showing is that there is an arms race going on because encryption is so good. And if you want to protect your privacy, all kidding aside, you need to work at it. It's not easy.
Mm-hmm. And there are going to be reasons all this, like, yes, anybody who's having the conversation in good faith but says I need to be able to catch the criminals is assuming that the definition of criminal is remaining roughly the same. And the reason that some of this is coming up now, and the reason that there's a lot more concern about the Paragon contract, for example, is not that it's new that the U.S. government is trying to figure out ways around encryption. It's that the U.S. government I have had several people ask, the next time you're going to be on DTNS, can you and Tom talk about secure communications and engaging in secure communications? Because there are now different, I'm trying to be cognizant of this show and its audience and say the goalposts are moving about why you may or may not want to hide your information. And so the fact that there continues to be this effort, even though, just like you said, Tom, on the other side, there are plenty of law enforcement people who understand that if you create a backdoor, you create vulnerabilities. And what I think is really interesting is this report about how for the first time this business leader has been targeted, because it's kind of like, I'm sorry, like the truth is they don't care when it's journalists and hackers. I wish they did, but they don't. But when it starts to be industrial espionage at a high level and it starts to be CEOs in danger, I think you're going to start to have an interesting, different conversation.
Yeah, I walk myself through this rather slowly sometimes because there's a lot of nuance to it. I don't think you can outlaw these tools from happening because they will be created. They're math, right? And that doesn't go just for encryption. That goes for Pegasus and Paragon and Graphite and all of that. Should law enforcement be allowed to use them? Probably. But there also should be ways for people to be able to prevent their data from being caught up in them accidentally, right? So let's set aside what makes a crime for the immediate moment. You can have your data swept up in something that you didn't do anything wrong in. And so I think it is reasonable to think, and in fact, the FBI and CISA said earlier this week that you should use end-to-end encryption to stop that from happening. They have a database called Kalea that collects all of the metadata in order to be able to use it to track down criminals, but it's all there. And now attackers are in that system and could have access to that. And they're saying you should use encryption to protect yourself. They are saying exactly what I'm saying, which is you need to be able to protect yourself from these kinds of tools.
Yep. If you can, and hopefully you can. And I think we don't know, right?
It's a matter of education.
It's successful.
I think that's the bigger deal is like you think using Signal and Telegram is ironclad because the end-to-end encryption is ironclad and it's pretty ironclad. They're not breaking the encryption. But if you really want to be safe, you better not be storing anything in the cloud because that's what's happening here is people are getting the messages other ways because, again, it's one thing when it's an intelligence person who is well briefed on how to protect their communications, or even a journalist who works in a sensitive area who is well educated on how to protect their information. It's another thing when it's somebody who is a normal person who now might be at the target of graphite.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a new world, and if you really do care about, and we have been trying to get you to care about secure communications for a long time.
Yeah,
but now it is probably time to pay a little bit of attention.
Definitely use WhatsApp, Signal, maybe Telegram.
I mean, the FBI is like, please use encryption.
And if you're concerned at all, make sure, don't assume, make sure that there's no cloud backup happening. Because that's one of the ways
that's the next. That's the Paragon wrinkle. That's super important to emphasize.
And then the Pegasus wrinkle is make sure that you reboot your phone regularly. That you are not clicking on links in text messages from people you don't know, or even emails, or opening Word docs, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
All right. Let's check out the mailbag.
What?
Yeah, I switched to the wrong. Board.
That's not about the mailbag.
This is a good mailbag.
There we go.
Anon Jr. writes on Patreon in response to our GDI conversation in Thursday's show about where we all store our photos and, speaking of the cloud, how best to do that. Anon Jr. says, I keep my photos in OneDrive. I have my phone set up to automatically upload them, mostly because I have an Office 360 and it comes with 1 terabyte of storage. I really enjoyed listening to the latest World's Greatest Con on my drive home, which is something that Justin Robert Young told us about yesterday, and he was very excited about that too. So thanks for listening.
Excellent.
It's good to like our shows.
And then Brian thanked those of you who wrote in to help about mobile offerings and password management. Brian says, I do have a duck.com and proton.me email address, so I think I'll start with Proton's offerings. I do need a vault for things like my passport pics and visas as a backup. It's also good to know I can save my security Q&A answers as I don't use the real answers because a lot could be guessed. There's just too much information about each of us out there. To our discussions point.
Brian, please write in with a tip sheet, by the way, because we didn't even cover secure email like Proton and Duck.
Indeed. Yep. Mm-hmm. Well, busily working over there in the corner has been Len Peralta this entire time. Len, what have you been drawing for us?
AI is the king of lies.
It sits on a throne.
Yeah.
Sits on a throne and is the king of lies.
A throne of lies.
Yes.
Oh.
This is what I'm calling Pinocchio AI.
Hey!
That's so
He's
funny.
got no strings, so watch his lion. Okay, anyway. Yeah, so this is my take on AI lying to us or reasoning with us. As
Reasoning.
Molly said. Yeah.
Hallucinating
hey,
sometimes.
This is a very cool thing. If you want to own this, you can. Just go to my online store, lenperaltastore.com, where you can also order, one of my custom drawn holiday cards, man. You can do that. And you know what? If you're a DTNS fan, let me know, and I'll send you the DTNS card. Or you can go to my Patreon, patreon.com /Len, become a DTNS lover level supporter, and you get this art right away. So there you go. It's all
stuff.
for you.
You even have that DTNS greeting
outstanding.
card over there. It's awesome.
Yeah, they do.
That
pretty
Pinocchio
cool.
is so good. Sorry, Pinocchio AI.
Pinocchio AI.
Okay,
It's so funny how I said all that stuff that I said, but I still want to defend my life partner, Claude. I'm like, yeah, but Claude doesn't lie to me.
Claude's different.
Claude gets me.
Claude loves you.
Mollywood, when you're not talking to Claude, what are you doing and where can people follow your work?
When I'm not talking to Claude is not often these days. I am still out here covering. I just went from tech reporter to climate tech reporter, y'all. Everybody in the pool.com is where you can subscribe to the weekly newsletter where I'm spotlighting brilliant startup founders who are working on climate solutions. And today's episode is like my favorite kind of boring awesome, which is that it turns out your ducts in like the heating and cooling ducts in your house, you lose 40% of your energy through the ducts. And there's a company that makes this magic pixie dust that they blow into your house and it seals the ducts. And then you save a bunch of money on your utility bills and also don't waste a lot of energy. And also it cleans up your air and all of that stuff. I love this kind of
I
boring,
loved
awesome,
this
cool stuff.
episode. I want to blow dust in my ducts after
Right?
this episode. It's not even that expensive as far as
It's
homeowner
really
stuff
not.
goes. Yeah.
No, I am blowing dust in my ducts as soon as possible.
Everyone joined us.
Not a metaphor.
Yeah. Not this time.
Not a euphemism this time.
There is more of this coming if you are a patron. Stick around for the extended show Good Day Internet. It's Friday and time again for another fun quiz. Roger has created a quiz about secrets. Encryption is not new. Caesar did it, for goodness sake. But we dive into the history of keeping secrets.
Oh boy. Do I have to tell you my secrets? I don't want to do that. You can catch our show live Monday through Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern. That is 2100 UTC, and you can find out more at dailytechnewsshow.com/live. We hope you have a great weekend. We're back on Monday talking about the evolution of blogging with Nate Langston. Talk to you then.
This week's episodes of Daily Tech News Show were created by the following people. Host, producer, and writer Tom Merritt. Host, producer, and writer Sarah Lane. Executive producer and booker Roger Chang. Producer, writer, and co-host Rob Dunwood. Video producer Joe Kuntz. Producer at large Anthony Lemos. Spanish language host, writer, and producer Dan Campos. Science correspondent Dr. Nikki Ackermans. Social media producer and moderator Zoe Detterding. Our moderators, Beatmaster W. Scottus 1, BioCow, Captain Kipper, Steve Guadarrama, Paul Reese, Matthew J. Stevens, a.k.a. Gadget Virtuoso, and J.D. Galloway. Mod and video hosting by Dan Christensen. Music and art provided by Martin Bell, Dan Luders, Mustafa A., Acast, and Len Peralta. Live art performed by Len Peralta. Acast ad support from Tatiana Matias. Patreon support from Tom McNeil. Contributors on This Week and Last include Nika Monfort, Chris Christensen, Scott Johnson, Allison Sheridan, Justin Robert Young, and Molly Wood. And our guests this week and last were Andrew Main and James Thatcher. And thanks to all the patrons who make the show possible. Claude be with you.
This show is part of the Frog Pants Network. Get more at frogpants.com.
Diamond Club hopes you have enjoyed this program.